Hey, I'm Mike Burnett. Welcome to the Real Squabble. Today, Glenn Wolf will lead us in a discussion about gun control. But before he does, let me remind you to follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel where we're talking about everything from being woke to neo-Marxism and coming up health and wellness and souls, near-death experiences, and reincarnation. We're just covering all the real issues. So, Glenn, what have you got for us today?
Yeah, so gun control. Whenever there's a mass shooting, we end up with just an amazing amount of concentration on this. But let's first face some real raw data. The CDC data shows that the gun deaths are climbing in America, both in just pure numbers and in population adjusted numbers. 2020 is the last year that we have any solid completed data from the CDC, and they say that there were more than 45,000 gun-related deaths in America that year. This includes gun murders, gun suicides, and a couple other less common gun-related deaths. Not only is 2020 one of the most deadly years in raw numbers and in population-adjusted numbers, but it is the third worst year in those numbers in the last 50 years. So since we end up getting all that attention about guns during the media exposure of mass shootings, it is probably good to keep in mind that those are, although not good events, they're teeny slivers of what those gun deaths actually are in America each year. Nonetheless, we hear politicians on both sides want to take guns, want to protect guns, however you want to couch the argument. How will limiting gun sales have any kind of an effect on gun deaths, Sue?
Wow. Yeah, how will it? Well, I think the only thing, and I actually did not pull up these statistics, the only thing I can say is that there was a noticeable decline after the assassination attempt on Reagan with the Brady bill, and a noticeable increase when that legislation expired. That's my understanding in very generic terms of that. So I think that might be the only intel we have in the last 50 years that would help us appreciate how that, to answer your question specifically. I don't think we can predict it. I think there's so many things that could predict it, but one of which is that we've become so angry generically and so divisive generically. I think we've talked about that in some other ways in some other times, but that is not helping. Right? There's so many elements here, but that is not helping. We know that. Everybody in the country knows that we're definitely becoming more divisive. And I also think that generationally, I don't think it's anecdotal. I am not one of those people that thinks we need to take video games or movies away from people, but I do think that the generational impact on exposure to that sort of thing, that sort of social media and everything else environment, not political, the impact on kids that they're seeing militaristic uses, let's say, or, even the Die Hard movies. They weren't that, the movies we grew up with, were World War II or country and westerns. The use of guns was not that prolific in every movie, but I think now it's much more so. So generically, I think that those things all combined. I don't know that anybody knows the specific answer to your question.
Well, can I jump in? I was looking at those same statistics, Glenn, with the CDC, but I also looked at the FBI, Police Foundation, and the ATF. I looked at all the statistics across the board, and I've got a few graphs that I could share, on our Facebook page later today or later this week. But what I saw, and it's relatively, if you can say, good news, it is because they tracked, the FBI and the ATF have tracked homicides, gun issues since 1966, probably before. But what I have is 1966 till now. What you see is from 1966 to 96, and you talked about the Reagan years, and I was surprised during the Reagan years, gun control and crime was through the roof, right? It really was. And it has actually, through the years, it has gone significantly down. Now, yes, it has spiked. If you look at the charts, like the Dow Jones, chart, in the last few years, it has climbed, but it's right now it's back to 1966 levels, right? In the way that it's climbed. But interestingly enough, what I have seen when I've looked at the statistics is that um, there's been a lot more gun control. There's been less deaths, but there's been an amazing amount of gun sales, right? I don't know if I'm jumping ahead of you or not, but there's been probably a half a trillion weapons sold in the United States. 20 million AR-15s sold. And most of the statistics that I've looked at have shown that in areas where people have legal weapons, crime has actually gone down.
Yeah, it is an interesting balancing. I don't know if it's a balancing of actually what's going on in those areas, or if it's just that people tend to be more law abiding, or the bad guys are scared that the good guys might have guns. I think that's the thing that the one side will always point at and say, no, the bad guys are afraid that they're going to get shot by good guys who have guns.
Interestingly enough, the Obama administration did a survey while he was in office at some federal penitentiaries, and about 2,000 inmates responded to the surveys, and they all said just what you did, that they were more afraid of the person on the street with a weapon than they were of law enforcement. Especially now, given the climate of
I'm not surprised for that. I am.
Right. Especially, well, given the climate now, that some laws are not being enforced as much as others, especially what you've seen on the news this week of the one guy jumping the subway gate. He had been let go carrying a weapon, a live weapon, and committing a crime. He'd been let go 3 times just this past week or the last few months, and that seems to be pretty indicative. The criminals don't seem to be as fearful of law enforcement right now, and we could debate why that is.
Mike, you said something that about sales going up so exponentially, and I'm really not demonizing any given side of things, but I think we all can agree that there's been a concerted political effort to insert fear into this conversation.
Yeah.
And fear is driving that. And you see it when you see the political environment change. When Obama took office, there was this huge jump because he's going to take our guns. And the same thing happened when Biden took office. Everybody was just like, he's going to take our guns. I don't. Mm-hmm. And I don't think there's any particular reason to have believed it in either case. It hasn't necessarily been true. I mean, the Brady bill was under Republican administrations, I think, or certainly from.
Yeah, it was. Sure, it was.
But in general, that intentional insertion of fear has not helped this conversation at any level in any place.
Right.
I'm really getting more and more cynical about, in general, large organization or corporate influence over those kinds of things, no matter what the topic is. This just happens to be one of them.
Right.
The intentional politicization of what is. Listen, I don't own a gun, and I don't have a problem if you do.
Yeah.
And but the bottom line is that common sense gets thrown out of the window when we intentionally polarize these conversations. And
Where do
that's
you keep your jewelry?
pardon.
Where do you keep your jewelry?
I don't have much of that either. It's not my thing.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
It's a
Sorry.
total waste.
No, I think you're spot on. I think, well, it's like everything we talk about on the Real Squabble. It's a complicated issue,
It is a very
but
complicated issue.
but the politics is definitely a feeder. No matter which side of the aisle you're on, it feeds it because when you come up to midterms like we are now,
Yeah.
if something happens, it's the heat is going to be turned up by the left or the right.
Yep, by both sides, exactly.
And what we have to understand, and I think we all do, is that if you're a leader of any type and you make a public statement, especially when you're president of the United States, regardless of whether you're a Republican or Democrat or whatever, when you make a statement, it is world news.
Right.
It is world news, and it impacts markets, and people will respond to that. And we know that when you respond to something globally, even if there's a 1% or 3% response, we're talking about billions of dollars, right? So if Trump said something, or if Biden said something, or Obama or Clinton or any of them,
Right.
Bush, if they said something, it impacted markets.
Huge, yeah.
And every time a Democrat makes a reference to gun control, it drives sales.
Yeah.
It drives sales. It's like
And membership.
And membership. So,
And membership. Yeah.
For the record, I am a member of the NRA, and I'm well armed. And I don't keep a lot of jewelry either, but I really believe in our, I'm a law-abiding citizen. You have nothing to fear from me. I don't carry. I'm not full of rage. I just want to be able to protect myself from someone trying to come in my house, hurt my family. If you mess with my family, you're going to get it.
Yeah.
Right. If you put my family in danger.
I'm gonna step in here and move this segue, because you beautifully bring up the next point I want to make. Mm-hmm. When Americans are asked about owning a gun, according to Pew, they say about 30% say they personally own a gun, and another 11% say they live in a house where a gun is owned. So that might be you, Mike, if your wife doesn't actually own a gun, but she lives in your house,
right?
She would be that 11%. My wife also happens to be that 11%. My son and I happen to be part of that 30%. So
well, I'm part of the majority, is what I just heard you say. Just because I'm skewed that way. But anyway, go ahead.
So yeah, and now to the majority, that 11% who live in a house are part of the 69. It's about 69% who do not own a gun, right? Of those people, when Pew asked them, would you ever? They're split almost in half. Yep, never, or yeah, I could consider owning a gun.
Yeah.
I think that, it's interesting because I know that I am blessed. I know that I feel safe and secure, and I have landed in a community by my choosing, but I've landed in a community where I could move if I needed to, but I don't feel the need, and I do not feel threatened. So I don't have any expectation that I'm going to intentionally move myself to a place where I feel more in trouble. So that's where I sit on that kind of answer when Pew calls my house or whatever. That's where I answer that. I mean, I don't think I'm unusual in that respect. I think that for the record, I have an expert marksmanship badge from when I was in the military. It's not that I'm not capable. It's not that I don't have the ability. I don't need to kill for sport, or it doesn't interest me, and I don't need to kill for food. So I'm not threatened. So I can't for the life of me figure why I would bother. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like just generically, that's where I'm at. I don't think I'm that unusual now.
But you wouldn't be the I would never buy a gun because you just can't personally foresee it right now.
No,
No, I
I'm
would
not buying
never
a
buy
gun. I'm
Yeah.
61. I don't have a need for a gun. I
Okay.
can't even imagine that I could here's where I have this conversation with women my age that are friends. You know, am I going to keep it under my pillow? I mean, are my reflexes, I'm not, right? And my reflexes, are they fast enough for me to actually be able to use it when I am most vulnerable, sleeping or in bed? You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
so then you get down to the mechanics of why, unless I have 30 years of practice at it, why, and I don't, why would I put myself in that kind of, like, I just don't even see the point. I just
Yeah.
don't even see the point.
I do enjoy it for marksmanship.
Okay.
The same way, and I enjoy marksmanship with a bow and arrow as well.
Okay.
And I like throwing knives. I'm not a violent person, but I do, I love doing those types of things.
Competitive, yeah.
Competitively, just for accuracy, kind of like you would throw a baseball to hit a mark. Um,
Yeah, I don't do
you
that either.
know,
But I gotcha.
you know what I mean? But what's interesting about the statistic you gave, Glenn, and I've looked at Pew Research as well, but not that specific number you mentioned. If what you said is true about the amount of people who have guns, that means that 30% of us have half a trillion guns.
Yeah.
And knowing the people that I know,
That's probably right.
it's probably true.
Right. That's kind of, and this gets to my issue, which you hear me say in virtually every conversation. When is enough?
Mhm.
Or what is enough? Define enough.
Yeah.
And I'm not really demonizing sport, or even
Mhm.
guys who are out, shooting deer
Right.
in, November. I really don't mind. I like venison, and I have some local guys that, I can buy from. But
Sure.
the point is, how much do you need?
That's
Right.
an interesting question. So I ran into this issue because I'm a collector of nice things, right? I like fountain pens and watches and shoes, right? My
Colt
wife
45.
my wife says, she saw a little teeny box come in the mail. This is a couple years ago, and she says, what is that? And I'm like, ooh, I think that's one of my new fountain pens from XYZ company, right? And she's like, don't you have enough? And I said, without pausing, and this was around the dinner table, don't you have enough handbags? And she said, never mind.
Right. Exactly. And you're a journalist by trade. So how could you not have enough pens?
Right. Right.
Now, if you live in Ukraine, which right now, how could you not have enough weapons? Right?
Yeah,
You're
okay.
not, you don't, you
Both live
don't,
in Ukraine right now.
you and I are the same, Sue, and Glenn as well.
Yeah.
We're fairly well to do. We live in good neighborhoods, and we don't have a danger. We don't feel endangered. We live in communities where we walk pretty safely. But a lot of people don't live in such hot neighborhoods
That's true.
or feel as safe.
I don't mind that. Yeah, I mean, I understand
Right?
it.
Or they live in places out in the country where it takes a long time for the police to respond. And given the climate today, and I have probably a half a dozen friends on the LA police force. My brother-in-law and sister-in-law are police officers in New Jersey, and some friends that are police officers in New York. And I know well, and locally in my church. I have a well-armed church too.
Shocker.
Well, some of the members are on the SWAT team, and
Okay. And so your point is that
my point is that I know anecdotally that, and from what I hear on the news and from different interviews on TV, that officers don't respond necessarily as quickly as they have in past years because of maybe all the media coverage, some of the pressures they get, the potential of losing their job by breathing wrong, and some of them, okay. And I think this is the few. There are a few that need to lose their jobs. There's some, what do they call it? There's some uh, they need to be looked at in many cases, scrutinized. We all do. The one thing I do know is that people in the military and the police force are the most highly scrutinized people in the world. That doesn't mean that they don't need to continue to be, because as we all three know, because we served for a long time in the military, that every organization has its bad apples. Um, so what do we do, Glenn?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, how about how about this for a question? So let me pose a scenario for you. Um, a Midwest family has generationally hunted and sport shot, have weapons. Everybody has weapons. Now the patriarch of the family is coming down with some early signs of dementia, and some of that is anger and suicide thoughts, which may be related to some medication. Okay, so a pretty common scenario that's probably going to hit many families.
Okay.
At what point do you take the access from the guns away? And if the medication changes and that solves itself, at what point is that allowed? Is there a point of no return where you say, okay, now these people can never have access to weapons again? It's a really tricky.
I don't think it's any trickier than driving. And I say this as one who just had to sort of take the car away from an elderly parent. I don't think it's any different than that. And frankly, I think there's a lot of parallels. I don't have a problem at all with requiring training to own a gun the way you require training to drive a car. On a very generic level, I'm not getting into weeds about how exactly, but I just think that if you teach people the use and if you license that use like you do with cars, which are also sort of, deadly weapons in a weird way in terms of traffic fatalities. If you treat it that way, then when you get to this question of an elderly parent who can't drive anymore because they can't see or has issues or memory issues, whatever, I don't see why you can't have a similar conversation. I don't think it's the government's job to take away the car, and I don't think it's the government's job to take away the gun at that point. I think it's the family, right? Or the extended family community, whether that's clergy or whatever, but even doctors. But I do think that for sure, even if my mother had access to a gun, once she got, into dementia, that wasn't going to happen anymore. She might not even have that choice. Like, right. I'm going to give her that choice.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't somebody else telling us that. That was me saying, Mom, you can't drive anymore. You can't shoot anymore. This is not good.
Right. Hey, well, first of all, Glenn, I would say to anyone who owns a weapon, it should be locked and secured. Right? It should be locked and secured. Only you should have access to it. You should have a coded box, lock on it, and not everyone in your family should have access to it. Right? Now, I know this firsthand in many ways that I won't go into. But my daughter is finishing up a PhD in psychology. My wife is finishing up a master's in psychology counseling, and I have a family member with mental health issues. A few family members, me included. And I'm not joking. I have anxiety. I've had some anxiety coming back from Afghanistan that I take some medicine for. And I would fall into that category, perhaps, that you mentioned, Glenn. I have anxiety, but I'm controlled. My anxieties are controlled. I felt myself having some small PTSD types of issues where I would get a little angry too fast with things. But that's a conversation that we as a society have to have. It's like, okay, you have anxiety. Anxiety is controllable. You don't have any record of raging and doing stupid things. You don't have anything on a police record, right? But um, something that I need to say because of my experience, and I meant to say this first and foremost, is that mental health, people with mental health issues are not the issue.
Right.
Most of they are such a small minority of people that have that shoot or cause crimes, that it's so infinitesimal that it's not even the place to focus, because most of the time they're the most vulnerable, most of the time. And there are a few hundred nationally where things happen, and a lot of times it's in places where it's a suicide. The vast majority of homicides, I think you mentioned that earlier, Glenn,
Yep.
the vast majority of homicides in our country are
Ourselves.
suicide. It's
Yes.
close to 60%. The vast majority of murders are in our inner cities, right? Um, and around the country. And we can argue about what should be done about that. We touched on it a little bit, but it seems like because of political reasons too that you touched on, they want to hammer on the AR-15. It's like, get rid of the AR-15s and crime will go down. Well, that's just a load of BS, because and other statistics on the FBI and ATF and CDC show that like 3% 3% of homicides are
With a long rifle.
are done with the AR-15 type of weapon.
Except I
You know
Or
would
what?
even
say
any
that
kind of a long gun.
I would say though that I think it's a much higher percentage of mass shootings are done with anything that's semi-automatic. Of mass shootings, right? Multiple people, more than four at a time, I think is the standard. It might be more than three, but I'm just
Yeah.
saying that that's the reason that gets attention, because
Right.
everyone goes, "Oh, thoughts and prayers," after every time we shoot up a school. I'm
Yeah.
over it. I'm like, well, until we kill enough children, we won't
Well,
do anything about it.
but again, that is horrific. That
It
is
is horrible.
super horrific. However, you also have to put that in the line of priority of how you address these things, because there have been 12 mass shootings since 1966. 12. The biggest problem, the biggest problem are murders. The
Yeah.
biggest problem are murders
Murder and
on the
suicide.
streets, murders and suicide. And if I mean, you can never. The best thing we can do with mental health issues is to reach out to people, be sympathetic, be support, be community support, be family support, to try to do our best to decrease suicides. The murders, that's another societal problem. What is driving that?
Well, right.
What
I
is
do think we need to be considerably more holistic in this conversation, in the big we
Yeah,
conversation about, what is causing it's what I was alluding to in the very beginning about, violence is just more accepted generically,
yeah.
was when we were kids.
But why? Why do we rage? Why are the young men in the cities
Young men are not in their
raging?
place. And it's not just in the cities.
Well, it primarily is.
No, Uvalde's not a big city. And, I mean, a
Well,
lot of
that was a mass shooting, yes. But that's, like I said again, that's not the primary place where murders are happening.
okay. Well,
Uvalde. I mean, again, I'm not trivializing that.
I know.
That's
I guess
horrible.
what I'm saying is that it is
But
young men. It is
politi-
young men. It is not just in the cities. It's young men. We got an issue with young men across the board. I don't know what's happening there. I don't have anyone in my circle that I can even
well,
connect with, or
in the inner cities, it's about 60% black men and 41% white men. That's an average statistic that's out there. The women, when you go into and other minorities fall into a smaller percentage. If you go into the cities, there's more. But the women, fall when you go into the black category, it falls into 4%.
But
And white,
I would say too that it's also domestic violence is up, and just across the board, violence is not in a great place in this country. We've sort of become more accustomed to it. And, there's a lot of cases where it's domestic violence. It's most of the time, it's actually people who know each other on some level, whether they're family or not. It is rare that it's,
it is.
But by the way, you said something about the number of mass shootings, which I actually looked up. So far this year, as of July 5th, there were 314 mass shootings in this country.
Well, what I've read from a few people is I would like to know how they defined it. Right?
It is. I'm not grabbing it really.
Right? Because I'm not. We don't even need to go there. But what I've noticed, and statistics are like this across the board.
Sure.
So you have to challenge those listening. Have to challenge each of us by looking it up and figuring it out. Because a lot of times when they say a gun was involved or a person didn't, I just heard this on the news this week. When they say that the person was shot, the person that was apprehended was shot by the police, was unarmed. Well, they left out the fact in many cases, according to the FBI and ATF, that the person was shot because they were going after the police officer's weapon. Right?
Well, I don't think we're talking about police right
or anyone. They weren't armed, but they were going after someone else's
weapon. Well, the definition in that statistic I gave was 3 or more shot, and that's not counting the police shooting the gunman. 3 or more shot with the weapon is a mass shooting.
Yeah. So a mass shooting happens in Chicago every day.
It happens 330 times this year so far.
Well, that's what I mean.
And that's not just Chicago.
But New York. That's what I mean. But if you talked about multiple people being shot by one person, and that's considered a mass shooting, yes. If you're talking about a mass shooting at a school, that's different. There's been 12 of them.
Still,
it's horrible. Yeah. But it's what.
I guess my bottom line though is that I even with the training thing. Listen, I was a Parks and Rec director for a long time, and the NRA was holding safe gun handling stuff in that recreation department. From like elementary school up. Okay, and in general, I don't know where that is anymore, but it is not that evident. Because I do believe training on proper use is essential to anything. Now, I get why maybe it's not the NRA because they've alienated 50% of the population. Just literally, it's a 50-50 split at this point in the country. But they've alienated enough people that not everybody wants them doing it. But we have to get back to where we have common sense stuff. So that it's, is it licenses? My God, you have to have a license to fish. That's, I'm not talking about taking away guns. Don't anybody misunderstand that. I do think there's common sense stuff that we could put in place and get a handle on some of it.
So the trick with licensing, and I don't disagree. I actually do have a license to carry, and you actually have to get a license to carry if you're going to conceal carry.
Yeah.
But because we're such a unique country where we've actually put in the Constitution that it is a right to own a weapon. There's no other quick memory. There's no other rights on the Constitution that require a license. So that's tricky, where you can't say you have a right, but you have to get a license for that right.
Right.
Because it's an inherent part of the right to be an American. So that's a tricky one. I think it probably takes a constitutional amendment, and I'm not sure anybody's got the backbone
get it anytime
to push
soon.
that forward, right?
That's where the struggle is, because we as a society we create policies around our rights. That's how it happens.
Yeah.
Because Governor Hochul in New York just changed the law to 21, which is okay with me. But people argue that it's like, okay, maybe your brain's a little more developed at 21. I don't know. I read the NRA website every day. There's a lot of common sense on there. Go and read it. Read the ATF. Read what's there instead of getting, like you said earlier, the anecdotes. Because what happens is folklore gets passed along,
Right.
just like people
In
think,
all directions. Yeah. Yeah.
right. Just like people think AR and the AR-15 stands for assault rifle, which it doesn't. It's like the brand of the name. I forget. Post it later. But it doesn't stand for assault rifle. As a matter of fact, it's not considered an assault rifle. It's semi-automatic. It fires like a hunting rifle. And the truth is, the AR-15 can be disassembled and look like a pistol. I can buy my Sig Sauer P30 X5 and buy accessories for it and make it look just like an AR-15. So, okay, you can ban AR-15s if you want, but you know what? Now I have a 12 plus one fire shotgun, right? That
That's
can
amazing.
fire just as fast as an AR-15, because you guess with an AR-15 you go like this: click, 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 click. It does. People think that you go boom and it goes. You can't buy those. You cannot. It's illegal to buy those. And if somehow you get one, it's got to be registered with the U.S. government and the military. You cannot have, even if you have a machine gun prior to 1986, which is the law, it must be registered with the federal government. And that leads to another point, Glenn. I don't know if you're going there or not, but that's not all of us, citizens uh, that want to just protect ourselves and hunt and just have our rights aren't the problem,
No,
because
yeah,
you can go get a machine gun on the black market. You can buy, as most of those criminals in that survey that Obama didn't go down to the local store to get their gun,
right.
right?
Well, the terrorists did, so there's that.
Well, so let's ping back to that scenario that I set up about the person who we decided maybe it was time they didn't have access to weapons anymore. What if they decide that they need access to a weapon and they want to buy one?
They could, if
They
they are.
sure can. I mean, it isn't going to stop the actual, like, if your mom wanted to drive, she could probably just go rent a car. I don't know if you took her driver's license away from her, but you probably just took her car from her.
Yeah, I had a family member do that and just go. I knew a number of older people who just did that.
Well, there
Yeah.
are multiple ways to evade, right? And
Right.
people with
If you
dementia aren't any less tricky, maybe more tricky than others.
And so I guess my point with bringing that
But I don't think
scenario
that
up
your guy is the problem.
is the laws are only ever curbing law-abiding citizens to act law-abiding.
right,
Most of us don't need gun control laws because we're already law-abiding.
right, it keeps the honest people honest.
Well,
That's
I
all.
feel like I don't care if everybody has a gun, but we have 1.3 guns per person in this country, and 60% of us don't have a gun.
Yeah,
Right. Right. So if every family, if every person has one, including children, has 1.3 guns, and there's two of us in my house and we don't have one, somebody else has got our 4 guns or whatever.
That's probably
yeah,
both of us on this panel are taking care of your
They're
guns.
skewing it.
yeah.
Right. Well, thanks for that.
I took care of all your family
Thank you for
tree,
that.
your whole family tree. Yeah,
Yeah, that's great. And you know what? Like seriously, I will tell you the honest to God truth. And I know that I'm a dead in the middle compromise kind of gal. I'm not on either polarized side on 90% of the stuff, but I will not live the rest of my life based on fear.
No, you shouldn't.
Right?
No,
I'm
no,
just not. And the whole concept that I got to go buy a firearm in case there's somebody in my mall or my theater, you know what? I'll just be a little Buddhist about it and say the truth is that I'm aware of my space. I'm aware of where I am. I make a wild effort at not going down blind alleys. And in the meantime, I am not going to overreact in my mind and go just because I feel like, oh, listen, that Washington sniper was in my neighborhood, like my gas station, right? When the Washington sniper was running around, what, in the early 2000s. And everybody was petrified. And you know what we did? We figured out that he had a pattern. He was sticking to near the highway, and we all got gas not near the highway and figured out ways to. But was I more conscious at that time? Yes. Did I go get a gun in case he happened to decide to come shoot up the? No, I just didn't. And I'm not
Well,
gonna.
maybe if you get shot, we'll be talking about reincarnation on a future show.
I'm good with that.
You'll come back as,
I will
Clint
come back
Eastwood.
and haunt you.
You'll come back as Clint Eastwood or somebody like that.
So one other really quick little thing that happened recently here in Washington State, where I am, a new law went into effect that you can't own a clip that has more than a 5-round capacity.
Really?
Okay.
You
What do
can't.
you
You
need
can't.
for?
And
Tell
I
me what
can't
you
buy
need.
one. I can't buy one in Washington or in Idaho or Montana and drive it across the border legally.
Tell me why you need more. I'm just curious because I really don't get why you need a clip that does more than 5.
All the clips do more than
It's
5.
an interesting question, right?
Why do you need it?
It's a pain in the butt to reload.
Right.
And if you're at the range and you're putting little holes in pieces of paper,
Right.
my arthritic thumbs hurt reloading.
Okay, picture this, Sue. Say you're at baseball practice and you're trying to do hitting practice. Could you imagine the pitcher out there, your coach only has 5 balls, and you have 9, probably 12 or 15 players on your team, and so every time 5 balls are hit, you got to go out in the outfield and collect up the 5 balls and come back. It's a pain in the butt, and you probably, if you're defending yourself, you probably don't need more than that. But for what he said, you do. But the truth is that most of the magazines are a lot more. They're at least 8+1, and the P320, is
17
like
plus 1.
20+1 or 17+1, depending, or what you get, right? And do you need that? Well, no. You
Is
probably,
there a middle ground anywhere in any conversation that
yeah.
I'm not saying you, but guys like you that are, law-abiding, sports more oriented, is there a middle ground? Is there any way that you can find a conversation at all to the middle?
Well, so in Washington, I own 2 clips that are, and I pre-owned them, that are for my 326 hour, that are 17-round clips. I won't buy any more. I don't need any more. I got 2.
Sure,
That's fine.
Sure. That's exactly same with me. And the thing is, why should am I living in fear? No. The fear is a balance thing. There's a healthy fear of fire, a healthy fear of getting hit by a car. But doesn't mean you're terrified. I don't live terrified. I live in a good neighborhood.
And you're well armed.
And I'm well armed.
Yeah, I live in a bad neighborhood and I'm well armed.
But the thing is, the bad guys don't ask these questions.
No, I just think that we have to find a way, if we want to get down some of those horrific numbers, whether it's the mass shootings, whether it's the schools, whether it's just the general increase that you notice we're back to 1966. It really doesn't matter. We all acknowledge this is a problem we have to fix. The point is we have to be talking to each other, and we're doing a good job at that here, but politically, we got to find a middle. There has to be some things that can be done. We have to do something. And I'm not talking about tokens, where this party's just going to say, we're going to push through this plan because that way we get votes. I'm not talking that. I'm talking about real compromise, which is we're sorely lacking in this country across the board. So that's, to me, that's part of what the Real Squabble was all about, which was.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I see that there's really only one political solution and one social solution. The political solution is to enforce the laws that are on the books because they're not enforced. By the bad guys get out on no bail immediately, multiple times now. So if you really want to bring it down, enforce the laws that are on the books. And I really believe that we have to think about the moral climate of our country, and the family, because that's where it starts. And you can't regulate that with politics. You teach your grandchildren, as I do, right from wrong, and they grow up learning that. But I think there are so many dysfunctional families, especially in
What? I
areas.
know a lot of these kids, a lot of these young men, just the ones that have been in the news or whatever, they were raised by good families. They were raised by families who taught them right from wrong. Something happened. Something happened in between. You have those lessons when you are 4 and 5, and all sorts of. You should get your your daughter in, not your sister. But they talk about, you have set a kid up by the time they are 5 or 6, and you just have to keep reinforcing it. You probably didn't reinforce it in these, I don't want to say bad seeds, but the problem children of all types that fall through the cracks. If they had a foundation by the time they were 5 or 6, I do think that we have a problem, and we do have an issue with that we have to look at. And
I'm going to jump in there, Sue, real quick. 2 things. First of all, I want to give the parents a bit of a break.
Yeah.
Even God, who was a perfect parent, couldn't make his children perfect. So let's give the parents a break.
I agree.
And there you have it. We've solved all kinds of problems today. You've been watching The Real Squabble. We've sorted out gun control. Mike, take us out.
Yeah. I would like just to make one last point. And I think that not everyone was raised in a good family.
True.
And I know that from dealing with families of counsel, family full of counselors, and national statistics. And you look in the inner cities, and you can see that in those communities, the multiple disruptive marriages and out of wedlock births and just the accountability. Not everyone, Sue. There are great success stories, but I
won't demonize the inner city.
I truly believe that it comes down to the family, and a lot of these kids don't grow up with fathers. They don't have accountability. They don't have someone teaching them right or wrong. Their daddy becomes the next gang member. And we didn't touch on that. The drug culture drives it because these kids aren't taught so well. The education systems in a lot of the inner cities just shove these kids through, where they get a diploma, which is really of no value to them. And then they get out there, they don't have anything, they don't have direction. And what do they turn to? They turn to crime and stupidity, unless they've got a natural instinct, a God-given instinct, as you say, Glenn, to go after that inner moral code that I think we all have in us. So
seems like it's clearly a topic we should continue talking about in another episode at some point.
Yeah, true enough. Thanks, guys. I appreciate you joining us today. That concludes the show. Tell us what you think about The Real Squabble and suggest topics. You can always comment while we're live, and we'll bring it up as we chat. And remember to like us on Facebook and subscribe to YouTube. We'll see you next time on The Real Squabble.